Hello everybody, I'm Gary Birchall. This is Adam Thacker who's going to be driving the build today. We're from Fireblade Software and we're here to talk a little bit about the game we're making, which is called Abandoned Ship. Firstly, I've just got to say, because I've been reading PC Gamer cover to cover non-stop for about 20 years, it's really cool for me to be here today, quite surreal. And I came to last year's Weekender as a punter. And I think by that point we'd only been making the game for about a month or so, and we barely had a prototype, so it's very weird to be presenting it on stage now. But anyway, it'd be really good to know if how many people in the audience have actually seen or heard anything about Abandoned Ship. So if I can see a quick show of hands. Okay, very good, thank you. For those that don't know, Abandoned Ship is a game where you take command of a ship and her crew, and you explore a diverse, procedurally generated world, and you take on quests and events, and sometimes those end up in combat. The game focuses on Age of Sail ships in what I like to call a grounded fantasy setting. And what that really means is that it's a world that has a similar sort of level of technology in terms of, like, say, the 1700s. But it allows us to take some liberties with the gameplay in the interest of just spicing things up a bit. For example, we have big sea monsters in the game. For those that have seen our announcement trailer, we kind of tease some of those by showing big, horrible tentacles coming up and grabbing the boat, which is quite a cool thing. The core gameplay in Abandoned Ship is split into two parts. Sorry, Mr. Engineer, could I have the slide up on screen? There's exploration and combat. The exploration you can see on the right there. So the camera's pulled back quite far, and you click around the map, exploring the world, and that's where you find ports and go to sort out these various quests. And sometimes those events will throw you into combat, which is the screenshots on the left there. So you're much more closer into the ships there. So we're going to flip you over to the build now. And this is a pre-alpha build, so the usual caveats apply in that you'll see some things that are unfinished or might be a bit buggy. But we've tried to base the game's art style on those classic naval oil paintings that I find very evocative and have a very timeless quality about them. And that felt like a good fit for us because we wanted this game to feel like you're surviving on the edge, like living in this world. It's tough and grueling. This isn't a jaunty pirate's tale. And quite often those paintings, they feel very dramatic and dangerous as well. So for us, that felt like it was a good fit. So in a second, we'll take you to a section of the game where we can explain some of the core functionality. And we call this the lone ship view. So if Adam loads that up now. So in this view, you're able to kind of set your crew to their default preferences and things like that. So you don't have to do this every time you go into every combat. When you first saw this here, we had the sails on screen, and as we get closer to the ship, we remove those so that you have very good clarity over the gameplay space on the deck. And also when you're fighting enemy ships, you don't want those obscuring what you're seeing of the enemy. The ship is divided into multiple sections. At the back of the ship we have the helm, and that's where you control performing maneuvers. In the middle of the ship are the masts. They control the speed of the ship, and that's for when you're changing distance. At the front of the ship is the sick bay, and crew go there to heal themselves. And on the mid, port, and starboard sides of the ships are where your cannon batteries are. And these are your primary weapons. So on this ship, we've got some cannons that fire round shot, which are very good versatile cannons. and we have some flamethrower cannons, which are very short-ranged but particularly nasty. And we have a few other weapons dotted around as well. So in the helm and the sick bay, we have some rail-mounted swivel guns. These are slightly more specialized weapons, tend to fall within either anti-personnel or anti-sail based. And on this ship, we've got one of each. So at the front on the sick bay, there is a chain shot, and that can only target the sails, but it does extra damage to those. And at the rear is a grape shot, and that's short-ranged, area of effect, and it is very good at hurting enemy crew. We also have a mortar in the sick bay as well, which is a one-shot weapon, area of effect, has some extra added bonuses, like it can cause hull cracks and fires, which I'll explain in a little bit. So each section on the ship has its own health bar, and that's represented in the bottom right corner of the screen. That's important because as your ship starts to take damage and those sections lose health, they'll start to have their functionality affected. So when it goes into the yellow, basically that section is 50% effective. And when it goes into the red, then that section's not functional at all. And you can repair your sections, which Adam will send one of his crew members to go and do that now. So you want to kind of keep your sections in the green, basically, otherwise your performance will be affected. There are 3 ways you can destroy a ship. You can kill all of the crew. You can hit the ship with weapons that damage the hull, and the health of the hull is represented in the bottom left there. And you can fill up the water gauge, which is just above the hull health. There are certain weapons that cause hull cracks, and these splinter the deck, and water shoots out. And the longer you leave those, so I think, Adam, can you trigger a hull crack for us? Right. So the longer that hull crack is left, that will slowly fill up the water gauge. And when that reaches the top, then your ship will sink. So it's in the player's best interest to make sure that these are repaired sooner rather than later. But we also have some pumps at the back of the ship as well, and they allow you to lower your water gauge. You move your crew around the ship a bit like you would in an RTS. So you basically select them and click where you want them to go and tell them what you want to man. And on this ship here, we've got crew of different classes, and they all have a speciality. And you can train your crew to have different specialities, but I'll just run through these quickly. So we have the navigator, and he's best on the ship's wheel. There's the gunner, who's best manning the cannons. We have the marine. The marine gets a bonus to melee, so he's good for if you're doing boarding actions or repelling boarders. There's the surgeon. The surgeon can heal other crew members outside of sick bay, which is a very useful attribute. And there's the sailor. The sailor's a bit more of a common crew member. You'll see them quite a lot. However, they get a bonus to repairing, so there's no dead weight on our ship. Everybody has a kind of a value that they bring to the crew. And finally, there's the captain. And they're the most important person on the ship because they're you. In other games similar to this, the player is basically the spaceship or the vessel that they're traveling in. And when that's destroyed, that's game over. And that's fine. For us, we wanted to push that a bit further and see where that could take us. So what happens if the ship is destroyed but the captain's still alive? Do they wake up clinging to a bit of driftwood, alone and stranded in the water? Do they make it to the lifeboat at the back of the ship? You know, what interesting things happen there? So in Abandoned Ship, when that happens, you go into a special game mode, and your story continues. And you know, your nautical career is at a low point at this point, and events may happen that lead to your demise. But equally, you can survive for long enough and get rescued and make it back to port, get a new ship and crew, and continue on your journey. So basically, as long as the captain is alive, there's always hope. Now, I've explained some of this partly so you have a context, so when we go into combat, then you know some of the things that Adam's having to contend with while he's playing the battle. But I also wanted to give you an idea of the fundamental vibe that we're trying to achieve with Abandoned Ship, which is we want to have all these systems that kind of interplay with each other and make the player have to make interesting and difficult decisions on a constant basis. And for me, I get a lot of fun from that, games that give you those sorts of choices. And one thing I found with this is, you know, it's very satisfying to, you know, defeat enemies under these conditions, because it's, you know, you're the one that's making the calls. You know, who doesn't like to triumph against a really difficult enemy because of decisions you made as a player? So, right, we'll move to a combat now. So I'll let Adam play this, and I'll just explain a couple of things that are happening. So right off the bat, he's just making sure his crew are in optimal positions, because they'll get a little bonus from doing things like that. So now Adam's got quite a few short-range weapons, so he is trying to move closer to the enemy ship, and he's done that by clicking on a certain distance where his weapons will become active on the left. The enemy wants to keep their distance, however. So there's a few shots coming in. Looks like Adam's targeting the enemy sails, so he wants to get those into the yellow and the red, because then he'll be faster than them. And he's getting a bit closer. He's being quite diligent and... Oh. So the enemy's caused quite a few hull cracks. With the water gauge that low, Adam could leave the hull cracks, but you know, that situation can get out of hand quite quickly. The enemy's being quite effective, actually, at making sure Adam's on the back foot. So Adam's going to send his captain to lower the water gauge, because the water level's getting a little bit high. And looks like he's going to open fire with a barrage. Okay, so he's timed all his weapons to hit at once so he can get a bit closer. He's nearly in range for some of his other weapons to start coming into play. Right, so Adam's close enough now that he's launched his harpoons. And he's doing a ram. So the ram's knocked the enemy crew to the floor as well, and he's able to use his flamethrowers to start causing some fires on the enemy ship. So, okay, the battle was a bit in the enemy's favour, but Adam's kind of turned it around now. He's able to use his grape shot as well to start targeting the enemy crew. So Adam's having to balance kind of maintaining his own ship at the same time as trying to defeat the enemy. And it looks like he's got this in the bag now. So the enemy AI are having to react to what Adam's doing, which Adam's dictating the battlefield now. So some of their crew are healing as well. A little bit unlucky there. His flamethrowers didn't start a fire when it landed on the enemy ship. Oh, another shot and you'll have done it, Adam. That victory. Well done. Good stuff. Thank you very much. Part of the core loop in Abandoned Ship is that you explore the world and you take on these quests and events. You end up doing a few combats, and after a while, either because you've taken a bit of a battering in combat there, Adam, if he performed the same, probably wouldn't make it out of another combat, or because the enemy ships are getting tougher, he'll want to find a port. And in port, you can repair your ship and upgrade. So we're going to show you some of the port functionality now, which is something we've only recently implemented. So you could do things like go to a tavern and recruit new crew. Maybe you want your ship to have more melee specialists in because that's your strategy. But we're going to go to the shops to repair and upgrade our ship now. So our first thing we probably want to do is repair our ship, which is in the bottom left there, just to kind of make sure that's going to put us in a good position for when we have other combats. We've given ourselves quite a bit of money here so that we can basically buy what we want for the purposes of the demo. But our ship is already full, so we want to kind of sell some of the slots that we want to drag some of these new weapons into. So Adam's just going to make some room for us to buy some stuff, basically. So you purchase things by dragging them onto the correct slot on your ship. So this bar shot here, that's a little bit like our chain shot. This one doesn't cause any damage, but it stops the enemy moving for a couple of seconds when you hit them. So that's very useful if you want to dictate the battlefield. Now, previously Adam wanted to get quite close, so a bar shot would have been quite useful in that situation. So Adam will buy that by dragging that across. So that suppression gun there replaces our grape shot. That one doesn't cause any damage either, but that's what I call a disruptor weapon. And what I mean by that is that it disrupts the enemy plans. So when you hit an enemy crew member with that, they'll just drop to the floor and be stunned for a couple of seconds. And that's quite a useful thing to do when, say, they're reloading the cannons and they're about to fire a shot at you, because suddenly you're stopping that shot coming in, and maybe you can get one off in the meantime. And little things like that at the right time can ultimately mean the difference between victory and defeat. So we're going to sell our flamethrowers because they're a bit too short range. And we're going to go for a bit of an opposite strategy here. We're going to purchase this lobber cannon. Lobber's a bit more long range. It's basically more powerful the further it is away from the enemy ship. And finally, we'll lose our current mortar because that is the one in the shop is a cooler version. It doesn't cause fires like the other mortar, but it basically it causes a single hull crack and punches through the deck of the ship and explodes from the inside. It does extra hull damage, so that will be particularly useful. And we'll just expand the number of new lobber cannons that we've bought by clicking the plus button there. Right, so we'll look at the upgrades tab now. So you can get upgrades for your ship a similar way that you would weapons by dragging them onto the correct slot. So we'll take some hull armor, which is basically going to make us a bit tougher. We'll take the hull spikes. So when you ram somebody with hull spikes, you do extra damage. But also if somebody rams you with hull spikes, then they'll receive a bit of damage as well. We already have some water pumps, so there's no point getting those. It's a shame there's automatic water pumps, and they don't need to be manned, which is incredibly useful for if you're plagued with hull cracks. But there is an icebreaker. We'll take that because I like it, not because it's going to have any function for us in a demo. In the game, if you're up in the Arctics, some battles can happen where there's icebergs, and the icebreaker stops you taking hull damage in battles like that from hitting the icebergs. And we also have, in the exploration side, there are special maps that you can only enter if you have an icebreaker. Right, OK, we'll leave port now. And we'll go to another of these lone ship views, because I just wanted to talk about some of the variety we have across the game. So what you're seeing on here is a collection of various things that impact like time of day, the biome, the water roughness, and the weather. Now, I kind of look at the sea and the scenes in the game as almost like a character in the game of itself. I guess, you look at the sea in real life, and that could be very different depending on when you see it. So we're just going to cycle through a few different variations here. And although this is a special level that we set up for the demo, in the game, if you sail to the right place at the right time, you'll be able to recreate all of these. So this is the tropics, so there's the water's very turquoisey. But if we cycle forward to Arctic, then we see that the water there is very deep and dark blue. So if we step forward one more, and these are temperate waters. So this is a good opportunity to talk about the weather. So much like if you go down to the coast on a lovely sunny day, the water can look a certain way. And if you go down again on a cloudy day, the water can look massively different. And we try to replicate that. So if we step forward from a clear day, and the only thing we're changing here is the weather's now overcast, and we've thrown some rain in. That massively changes how the scene looks. And we always try to have gameplay functionality hook into this. So the rain here, for example, extinguishes fires. And that could be a help or a hindrance, depending on how you've set up your ship. I once basically geared my ship to have all flaming weapons, which was a really effective strategy until I came to a raining map, which kind of took the sting out of my tail. So if you step forward another one, please. So yeah, just we'll cycle through the times of day now. So this is daytime, and we're only going to just change it through to dusk, and now night. So we can see the moon reflecting there because it's clear weather. If it was overcast weather, then we wouldn't see the moon. Let's go through to dawn, please. And now we're going to look at some of the way that the water roughness changes and how that's going to impact gameplay. So if you can cycle through, so everything we've seen so far has been choppy water. We're going to look at one extreme now, which is when the water's kind of mill pond still. So the only thing that's affecting the water there is the wake of the ships. And these are the sorts of weather conditions that you might have fog appear. And when fog is on a combat arena, that's going to really obscure what you can see of the enemy ship. Now let's push it to the other extreme and look at storms. So naturally the water's a lot foamier and rougher. Storms are prone to tidal waves appearing, which we'll see when we do our final combat. And you might have lightning come into play. Lightning's something whereby if that hits the deck of your ship, that'll start a fire. If you could skip it forward, please, Adam. It's back to our tropical scene. Now, part of the reason we do this is that we have all of these systems that interplay with each other, just at the ship level. But it's quite cool to have all these extra modifiers come in from weather and things like that that affect people and how they play the game. Now, I'll talk briefly about our art style inspiration here, because that's affected us and how we've been looking at the game by quite a lot. So when you think of those paintings that are our reference, they're often quite extreme visions of the sea. Almost like if you're reading a good book, you know, that sort of thing describing the ocean that you picture in your mind. And we've tried to be inspired by that and replicate that. So some of the colours are pushed quite far. We've tried to make the ocean look as if it's been painted upon a rough canvas. There's lots of other little techniques, like all the textures are painted with a raised brushwork quality. Those paintings are very high in contrast and have a vignette. If you just turn off the post-process a second, you can see some of those subtle effects combine if we switch it back on again, just to make it feel a little bit more like an oil painting. So I think if we skip it forward one more scene, this will be a good illustration of how we, just by changing a couple of things, can radically affect both what the player sees and what they're doing in the game. So previously it was tropical dusk, but it's choppy and clear. And now we're looking at something where it's still tropical and dusk. You still get little bits of turquoise, little bits of orange poking through for the dusk, but it's now really dark and threatening. We have some lightning, it's good timing. and this is going to be where our final combat's going to be. So let's go to that now. So this time, Adam wants to keep his distance because he's got some good long-range weapons. So he's going to click that he wants to keep his distance from the enemy ship, which is done on the distance bar on the left. Right, remember that lightning, if it hits any of the ships, that's going to cause a fire to start on the deck. So that hull destroyer is the one that punches through the deck. That should explode outwards. So although Adam's still a bit too close for the lobber to be too effective, he's doing quite a lot of damage to the enemy ship. Okay, he's being quite aggressive here, deciding to ram, guessing that so that he can knock the crew to the floor to then give him some time to move away, which is an interesting strategy. He's been quite clever with his use of the suppressor gun as well. So remember, that stops the crew doing what they're doing if it hits them. So he hit the guy on the ship's wheel, which means the ship would stop dead. And I saw he also hit them with the bar shot just before that. So it didn't quite work out, but it was quite a clever strategy. It probably didn't work because his sails are in the yellow, so the enemy ship is at the moment faster than him. So he's sending somebody to repair that now. Now, sooner or later, we might see a tidal wave come in. When that happens, that's going to hit both ships. Oh, it's coming on now, in fact. When a tidal wave hits you, we have this mechanic called brace for impact. And the player has to press a button within a certain window, or with the tidal wave, that means if you fail, you could have crew swept off the deck. Now, we have a winch at the back of the ship where you can bring them back in, but it's just another thing that you don't want to contend with if you're in the middle of a battle and suddenly a crew member is off at the back of the ship. They'll drown unless you winch them back in. Oh, it looks Adam's defeated them. Well done. Good stuff. Thank you, Dan. Have the last slide, please. Well done, Adam. So, hopefully you can see what it is that we're trying to achieve in Abandoned Ship, where we have all of these interesting systems. They all interplay with each other, and that's always trying to make the player feel like they're in a position where they have to make interesting and difficult decisions on both a moment-to-moment basis as well as across the entire game. Could you put up the last slide, please? Thanks. So I mentioned the sea monsters earlier. There's a screenshot of one of those in screen, so we'll talk more about that hopefully in the summer, but hopefully you've enjoyed today's demonstration. If you like what you see, then we're on Steam, so please add us to your wish list. You can follow our progress on the social media links at the bottom there. It's really important to us that if you liked what you've seen, that you tell your friends about us, because we're a very small indie team. We don't have a marketing budget or anything like that. So you guys spreading the word makes a significant difference to us. If you go to the website, which is abandonedshipgame.com, and sign up to a newsletter, you can also get your name in the game, and you'll be a randomly generated crew member. So that's quite fun to see your own name game pop up on the enemy crew, for example. It's like, oh, go easy on him. Yeah, including myself and Adam, we've actually got the whole team with us here today as well. We've got Aaron, Alex, and Mark. So if you see us wandering around the show and you want to ask us any questions or anything like that, then please just come up to us and talk to us. We love talking to people about the game, so don't be shy. Speaking of which, I believe there's some time for some Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions, I guess just put up your hand and Lovely person there will come round with a microphone. Anybody? Don't be shy.
When you're attacking the opposite ships, would there... Sorry, if you're attacking the opposite ships, sorry. Is there a possibility of salvaging bits and bobs off your enemy ship in the future?
So every time you defeat an enemy ship, then you'll get stuff that you can use to buy other things. So if the enemy ship is still there at the end of the battle, you'll get more stuff, but you won't be able to pick and choose specific things. Who's next? Were you scratching your nose? Right.
Hiya. Is it meant to just be a single-player experience, or are you going to be looking at multiplayer in the future?
Yeah, so when we started development of the game, it was always primarily a single-player experience. And at the start, we had multiplayer, and we were doing multiplayer battles. We kind of reached this point where we realized that multiplayer was just a bolt-on and it wasn't really adding value, so I think we took the sensible decision and went, well, let's just put all of our efforts into making sure we really nail the single player, which I was totally fine with because, like I said, from day one it was always a core single player experience. Who's next? Down there?
Yeah, thanks. So if it's a single player, it means you should have a solid story in the game, right? So,
yeah.
So what is this about? I must have missed it. Maybe it was in the beginning. So could you please repeat that?
Yeah, no, sure. You didn't miss it. This was more, because this is our first public demonstration, it was more focused on core gameplay mechanics. And we will talk about the story. Essentially, there is a doomsday cult that's going to bring about the end of the world that you're in. And that's kind of linked around worship of these sorts of horrible sea beasties. We will talk more about that. But yes, there is a story that's going to drive the player. And players can choose to really aggressively follow the main story and ignore all of the side quests and everything, or they can explore every nook and cranny of the world and find all of the various quests and sub-quests and things like that. So the player will have quite a bit of degree of freedom as to how aggressively they pursue that main story. Over there. Oh, 2 questions.
With the single-player element of it,
yeah.
Will you be coming up against notorious pirates in, say, boss battles and so on?
So one of the things that we're going to do is have this notoriety system in the world. And what that means is that I want all of the player actions in the game to mean something. So I'll give you an example. Maybe you have an event where you come across a ship and it's in distress, and you decide not to help. Then the game will message this to the player, but the game will remember that and feed that into a system that will, at some point later in the game, you might have an event happens where that person crops up. And they might say, well, hang on, you're in trouble now, or I've met you, and I remember you abandoned me, so actually it's payback time. Or, the flip side is you help them, and you're in a spot of bother, and then they turn up and say, well, actually you helped me when my ship was on fire, so I've helped you there. So your actions are going to have ramifications on the world at that level. So you will gain a certain amount of notoriety through doing that. Anybody else over there?
Are there going to be any genders in the game?
Yeah, so the captain is going to have the greatest degree of customization in that you can choose gender, skin color, hair color. Hopefully we'll be able to offer more customization options, but we'll talk more about that at a later date. One more question. Yeah.
I may have missed this, but will you be able to trade with local towns or villages while you go through the seas later on with the loot that you acquire from other ships, or will it be strictly on the sea?
So, no trading. This isn't a game where you're going to be taking sugar at one price and porting it across to town on another island and selling that. That's not this game. Sorry if people want that, but this is about, tough combat, making a difference in this world and, defeating this horrible cult that's going to end things. And there's just no time to cart around trade. I think that's all the questions, right? Like I said, if anybody wants to just come up and ask questions if we're wandering around, please do. But thank you for coming. You guys are awesome.